Can we eat with you? 5 words. That's all it took to shatter a single father's world in the middle of a crowded diner on an ordinary Wednesday evening. 2 little girls, barely 5 years old, starving, trembling, stood beside Corbin Dean's table with hollow brown eyes that had already seen too much pain. Their dresses were dirty, their faces were smudged with tears and grime. This is the story of courage, heartbreak, and how a single act of kindness at a window table became the beginning of something beautiful. Before we continue, please tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. The Riverside Family Diner smelled like coffee and grilled onions, the kind of place where the menu hadn't changed in 20 years and the booths still had duct tape holding the seats together. It was October 2019, and the evening sun was pouring through the front windows, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Corbin Dean sat at his usual table by the window with his 5-year-old son, Rory. The boy was chattering excitedly about a drawing he'd made at school, a picture of their house with a purple sky, because, as Rory explained with the seriousness only a 5-year-old could muster, purple skies were prettier than blue ones. "And I put Biscuit in the front yard, Daddy, even though she never goes outside because she's scared of birds, but I wanted her in the picture anyway," Rory said, his small hands gesturing wildly. Corbin smiled, reaching across the table to ruffle his son's dark hair. "Sounds perfect, buddy. Can't wait to see it." It was their routine. Every Wednesday at 6, same table, same server, same order. Grilled cheese for Rory, a club sandwich for Corbin. They had been coming here since Rory was 3, back when Corbin was still figuring out how to be both mother and father to a little boy who asked when Mommy was coming home. Corbin had just opened his menu when he felt it, a gentle tug on his jacket sleeve. He turned, and his heart stopped. 2 little girls stood beside his table. They couldn't have been more than 5 years old, tiny, fragile things with tangled brown hair that hung in their thin faces. They wore matching pink dresses that might have been pretty once, but were now faded and covered in dirt. Their feet were bare, caked with mud and blood from fresh cuts. But it was their eyes that Corbin would never forget. Pale, sunken deep into their small faces, carrying a weariness that no child should ever know. The taller girl still had her fingers wrapped around Corbin's sleeve. She looked up at him, and when she spoke, her voice came out barely above a whisper, cracked and trembling like something broken. "Can we eat with you?" The words hung in the air. Corbin felt the breath leave his lungs. He looked at these 2 children, their legs shaking as if standing required more strength than they had left. The second girl stood just behind her sister, silent, staring at the floor, with her arms wrapped tightly around her own body. Before Corbin could respond, a sharp voice cut through the restaurant like a knife. "Hey, how did you 2 get in here?" Brenda Hollister came storming across the diner, her face flushed red with anger. She was a stout woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and a no-nonsense expression that had intimidated many customers over the years. She hadn't seen the girls slip through the front door. They'd moved like shadows, unnoticed until this very moment. "This isn't a shelter," Brenda snapped, reaching for the arm of the girl who had spoken. "You can't just wander in here begging from my customers. Out! Both of you! Right now!" The silent girl let out a small, terrified whimper and pressed herself harder against her sister. The other one, the brave one who had asked the question, flinched but didn't move. She just kept looking at Corbin with those hollow eyes, tears beginning to spill down her dirty cheeks. Something inside Corbin ignited. "Don't touch her." His voice was firm, steady, and carried an authority that surprised even himself. He stood up from his chair, positioning himself between Brenda and the 2 girls. He was a tall man, 6'2", with broad shoulders from years of carpentry work, and when he stood, he commanded the space. "Warren, these kids are—" Brenda started. "These kids are hungry." Corbin cut her off, his voice quieter now but no less firm. "Look at them, Really look at them." Brenda's mouth opened, then closed. For just a moment, her hard expression flickered, something softer breaking through the surface. She looked at the girls again, really looked. At the cuts on their feet, the bruises on their arms, the way they were swaying slightly, as if gravity itself was too much to bear. "They're not bothering me," Corbin continued. "They asked if they could eat with us, and the answer is yes." He turned away from Brenda and crouched down to the girl's level, his knees pressing against the cold tile floor. Up close he could see that their lips were cracked, that their fingernails were caked with dirt, and that they smelled like sweat and fear and something else, something that made his chest ache. "Of course you can eat with us," he said gently, his voice softening. "Come on, sit down. You're safe now." The brave girl's lower lip trembled. A single tear escaped and rolled down her dirty cheek, cutting a clean line through the grime. She nodded slowly, and together, moving as one unit, never letting go of each other, the two girls climbed into the booth across from Rory. Brenda stood there for a long moment, arms crossed over her chest, something shifting behind her stern expression. Finally, she let out a heavy sigh, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and weary. "Fine," she muttered, shaking her head, "but you're paying for whatever they eat." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Corbin replied, meeting her eyes. Brenda walked away, her footsteps heavy against the floor. But Corbin noticed that when she returned 10 minutes later, she brought 2 glasses of warm milk for the girls, without being asked, and without adding it to the bill. She set them down on the table gently, her expression unreadable, and walked away without a word. Rory was staring at the girls with wide, curious eyes. He was a shy kid, the kind who hid behind his father's leg when strangers talked to him. But something about these two seemed to reach past his natural reserve. "Hi," Rory said quietly. "I'm Rory. That's my dad." The brave girl looked at him and managed a small, trembling smile. "Hi." "Are you hungry?" Rory asked. She nodded. Without another word, Rory pushed his plate of French fries across the table toward her. "You can have some of mine." The girl stared at the fries like they were treasure. Then, slowly, carefully, she picked up one and took a tiny bite. The silent girl beside her watched but didn't move. "It's okay," Corbin said gently to the second girl. "You can eat. It's safe." The girl looked up at him. Really looked, and something in her pale green eyes cracked open just a fraction. She reached out, took a single fry, and brought it to her mouth with shaking hands. Corbin flagged down the server, a young woman named Kelly, who'd been working there for years, and ordered 2 grilled cheese sandwiches, 2 bowls of tomato soup, and 2 hot chocolates. Kelly didn't ask questions. She just nodded and hurried toward the kitchen. "What are your names?" Corbin asked, keeping his voice as soft and non-threatening as possible. The brave girl swallowed the French fry and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "I'm Juliet," she whispered. "That's my sister, Joy." "Juliet and Joy," Corbin repeated, committing the names to memory. "Those are beautiful names." Juliet nodded but didn't say anything else. Joy still hadn't made a sound, hadn't even looked up from her plate. "How old are you?" Corbin asked. 5. We're twins." "Where are your parents?" Juliet's face crumpled, and for a terrible moment, Corbin thought she was going to start sobbing. But she held it together, her small body trembling with the effort. "Our mama died," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We don't have a daddy. We don't have anybody." Rory, who had been listening quietly, suddenly reached across the table and patted Juliet's hand. "It's okay," he said, with the earnest certainty only children possess. "My mommy died too, but we're still okay. My dad takes really good care of me." Juliet looked at Rory, then at Corbin, and something shifted in her expression, something like hope, fragile and desperate. The food arrived and the girls ate like they hadn't seen a meal in days, which, Corbin suspected, might have been closer to the truth than he wanted to believe. Juliet ate slowly, savoring every bite, as if she wasn't sure when the next one would come. Joy ate faster, hunched over her plate protectively, her eyes darting around the restaurant like she expected someone to take the food away. Corbin sat back and watched them, his mind racing. These girls were in trouble, serious trouble. Whatever situation they'd come from, it wasn't safe. He could see it in the way they flinched at sudden movements, in the way Joy refused to speak, in the bruises that covered their small arms. "Juliet," Corbin said gently, "where did you come from tonight? How did you get here?" Juliet looked up from her soup, her spoon trembling in her hand. "We walked." "From where?" "I don't know the address. It was far. We walked for a long time." "Who were you with before you came here?" Juliet's expression darkened. "A lady. She was supposed to take care of us, but she locked us in our room. She said we were too loud. She said she was tired of listening to us cry." Corbin felt rage building in his chest, hot and fierce and protective. "She locked you in your room?" Juliet nodded. "Joy figured out how to open the window, so we climbed out and we walked until we saw the lights." "Why didn't you go to the police or find another adult?" Juliet looked down at her soup. "People don't help kids like us. They send us back, or they send us somewhere worse. But you looked nice. You looked like the way my mama used to say daddies were supposed to look." The words broke something inside Corbin. He felt tears prickling at the corners of his eyes and had to look away before the girls could see. Rory leaned closer to his father. "Dad," Rory whispered, "can they stay with us?" Corbin closed his eyes. He wanted to say yes. Every fiber of his being wanted to scoop these two broken children into his arms and take them home and keep them safe. But he knew it didn't work like that. There were rules, systems, procedures. "I need to make a phone call," Corbin said quietly. "But I promise you, I promise both of you, that I'm going to make sure you're safe. Okay?" Juliet stared at him, searching his face for lies. Finally, she nodded. Corbin stood and walked to the front of the restaurant, pulling out his phone. His hands were shaking as he dialed. 911, what's your emergency? "I need social services," Corbin said. "I have 2 children here. They're in trouble. They need help." While they waited for someone to arrive, Corbin learned more. Juliet did all the talking. Joy remained silent, her eyes fixed on her plate, never speaking, never making eye contact. Their mother's name had been Colleen Bellamy. She'd been 29 years old. She'd worked at a laundromat, pulling double shifts to keep a roof over their heads. She'd been everything to them: mother, father, protector, provider. And then one day, 8 months ago, she'd collapsed at work. Viral myocarditis, the doctors said later. An inflammation of the heart that had gone undetected until it was too late. She was gone before the ambulance even arrived. The girls had been home with a babysitter. They never got to say goodbye. "Joy used to talk all the time," Juliet explained, her voice small and sad. "She talked even more than me. But when the lady came to tell us Mama wasn't coming home, Joy stopped. She hasn't said a word since." Corbin looked at the silent little girl across from him, and his heart shattered. "What happened after your mama died?" he asked gently. "They put us with different families, 3 different ones, but nobody wanted to keep us. I get scared at night and cries sometimes, and Joy doesn't talk, so people don't like her. They said we were too hard, so they kept sending us back." "And the lady you were with tonight?" Juliet's face darkened. "She was mean. She had too many kids. She yelled all the time, and when I cried last night because I had a bad dream about Mama, she locked us in our room and said if we made one more sound, she'd send us to a place where bad kids go." Corbin had to physically restrain himself from getting up and walking out of that diner to find that woman. He clenched his fists under the table, breathing slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. "Why did you choose me?" he asked. "Why did you come to my table?" Juliet looked at him with those heartbreaking green eyes. "Because of the way you were looking at Rory. The way you smiled at him. The way you touched his hair. My mama used to look at us like that. And I thought, I thought maybe you had enough love for two more. The words knocked the air out of Corbin's lungs. He thought about his own life, about Joanna, his wife, who had died 3 years ago from complications related to lupus, about the months of grief that had nearly drowned him, about rebuilding his life piece by piece, work, dinner at 6, bedtime stories, Sunday visits to Joanna's grave. He'd convinced himself that his heart was full enough, that he didn't have room for anything more. But looking at these two girls, these brave, broken, beautiful souls who had walked miles through the cold just to find someone who might care, he realized how wrong he'd been. The social worker who arrived was a tired-looking woman in her 40s named Ruth Ramos. She had kind eyes, but a worn expression that suggested she'd seen too much heartbreak in her career. She spoke with Corbin first, taking notes as he explained what had happened. Then she spoke with the girls, gently, patiently, coaxing the story out of Juliet, while Joy sat silent and still. "I'm going to take them somewhere safe tonight," Patricia said to Corbin. "Thank you for calling. A lot of people wouldn't have." "What happens to them?" Ruth looked at him, and something sad flickered across her face. "We keep looking. That's all we can do."
Corbin wanted to argue, wanted to scream that these girls deserved better than to be shuffled from place to place like unwanted furniture. But he knew Ruth was doing her best in a broken system. "Can I stay in touch?" he asked. "Can I check on them?" Ruth hesitated, then nodded. "I'll give you my card. Call me next week." When it was time for the girls to leave, Juliet started crying. Not loud, dramatic sobs, just quiet tears that rolled down her cheeks as she slowly slid out of the booth. "Thank you," she whispered to Corbin. "Thank you for letting us eat with you. Thank you for not letting the lady throw us out." Corbin crouched down and pulled her into a hug. She clung to his jacket so tightly that her knuckles turned white. He could feel her small body shaking against his chest. "You're so brave," he whispered into her hair. "Both of you are so brave." Joy, who still hadn't spoken, reached out and touched Corbin's hand. Just for a second. Just the lightest brush of her fingertips against his skin. Then she pulled back, her eyes wide and fearful. Ruth gently pried Juliet's fingers loose from Corbin's jacket. "Come on, sweetheart, we need to go." Corbin stood at the front window of the diner and watched as Ruth led the girls to her car. Juliet looked back once, her small face pressed against the rear window, and raised her hand in a tiny wave. Corbin waved back, his throat tight, his eyes burning. Rory stood beside him, his small hand slipping into his father's. "Are they going to be okay, Dad?" Corbin didn't answer right away. He didn't know how to answer. Finally, he squeezed his son's hand and said, "I'm going to make sure they are." That night, after Rory was asleep, Corbin sat on his back porch in the October darkness and let himself cry.
He cried for those two little girls. He cried for their mother, who had fought so hard and lost. He cried for Joanna, who would have known exactly what to do in this situation. He cried for all the broken families in the world and all the children who fell through the cracks. And then, when the tears finally stopped, he made a decision. The next morning, Corbin called Ruth Ramos. "I want to know how they're doing," he said. "I need to know they're okay." Ruth was quiet for a moment. "They're in emergency foster care right now. It's temporary. We're still looking for a more permanent placement." "Can I visit them?" "Mr. Dean, I appreciate what you did last night, but I know I'm a stranger. I know I have no legal right to these girls, but they asked me for help, and I can't just walk away. Please, just let me visit them once. Let me see that they're okay." Ruth sighed. "Let me see what I can do." 2 days later, Corbin found himself sitting in a small, sterile room at a child services office. The walls were painted a cheerful yellow that didn't quite mask the sadness that seemed to seep from every corner. When Juliet and Joy walked in, escorted by a caseworker, Juliet's entire face lit up. "You came back!" she cried, running across the room and throwing her arms around Corbin's waist. Corbin held her, his eyes burning. "Of course I came back. I told you I'd make sure you were okay." Joy stood in the doorway, still silent, but her eyes were brighter than they'd been at the diner. She took a hesitant step forward, then another, until she was standing right in front of Corbin. She didn't hug him, but she reached out and gently touched his hand again. That same light, tentative touch. "Hi, Joy," Corbin said softly. "I'm glad to see you." She didn't respond, but the corners of her mouth lifted just slightly. They spent an hour together. Corbin had brought coloring books and crayons, and Rory had sent along one of his favorite stuffed animals, a worn blue elephant named Mr. Trunk. "Rory wanted you to have this," Corbin said, handing it to Juliet. "He said Mr. Trunk is really good at helping you feel better when you're sad." Juliet clutched the elephant to her chest, fresh tears streaming down her face. "Thank you. Tell Rory thank you." As the hour drew to a close, Juliet looked up at Corbin with those heartbreaking green eyes. "Are you coming back?" she asked, her voice small and frightened. Corbin knelt down so they were eye level. "Yes, I'm coming back. And I'm going to keep coming back. Okay? Promise?" "I promise." Over the next 2 weeks, Corbin visited the girls 3 times. Each visit, he brought small gifts: books, toys, warm socks, a brush to help untangle their hair. Each visit, Juliet talked a little more, opened up a little more. And each visit, Joy stayed silent, but seemed to grow just a fraction more comfortable in his presence. On the 4th visit, Corbin brought something different. He brought paperwork. He'd spent every evening for the past 2 weeks researching, reading, making phone calls, talking to lawyers and social workers and adoption agencies. The system was complicated, deliberately so it seemed. But Corbin was nothing if not determined. "Ruth, I want to adopt them." Ruth looked up from her computer, her eyes widening. "Mr. Dean, that's a big decision." "I know. I've thought of nothing else since the night I met them." "You're a single father. You already have 1 child. The courts are going to scrutinize." "I don't care," Corbin interrupted. "Those girls have been through 3 foster homes in 8 months. They've been rejected, abandoned, and traumatized. Someone needs to fight for them. And if no one else is going to do it, then I will." Ruth studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Okay. But I need you to understand, this isn't going to be easy. There are home studies, background checks, financial assessments, psychological evaluations. The process can take months, sometimes years, and there's no guarantee the courts will approve it. I understand. And even if they do approve it, there's going to be challenges. Joy hasn't spoken in 8 months. Juliet has severe separation anxiety. They've both been through trauma that's going to take years of therapy to work through. I understand that too." Ruth leaned back in her chair, something softening in her expression. "Why are you doing this?" Corbin thought about it. He thought about the night at the diner, about Juliet's trembling voice asking if they could eat with him, about Joy's silent tears, about Rory sharing his French fries without being asked, about Joanna, who had always told him that love wasn't something you ran out of. It was something that multiplied the more you gave it away. "Because they asked for help," he said simply, "and because I have enough love for 2 more." The process was brutal. Over the next 6 months, Corbin's life became a maze of paperwork, appointments, and evaluations. Social workers came to his house and inspected every room, every cabinet, every corner. They asked about his finances, his work schedule, his support system, his parenting philosophy. They interviewed his neighbors, his employer, his friends. A psychologist evaluated him, probing into his grief over Joanna's death, his coping mechanisms, his emotional stability. A judge questioned whether he could handle 3 children on a carpenter's income. Another social worker expressed concern that he was acting impulsively, driven by emotion rather than logic. There were moments when Corbin wanted to give up, moments when the obstacles felt insurmountable and the dream felt impossible.
Moments when he lay awake at 3 in the morning wondering if he was crazy to think he could do this. But every time doubt crept in, he thought about Juliet and Joy.
About the way they lit up whenever you visited. About how Juliet had started calling him Mr. Corbin, and then, tentatively, Uncle Corbin. About how Joy had started bringing him drawings she'd made, still not speaking but communicating in the only way she knew. And he thought about Rory, who asked every single day when his new sisters were coming home. "Dad," Rory said one night as Corbin was tucking him into bed, "are Juliet and Joy going to live with us?" "I'm trying, buddy. I'm trying really hard." Rory looked at him with those serious 5-year-old eyes. "Good, because I think they need us, and I think we need them too." Corbin pulled his son close and made a silent promise. He would not give up, no matter how long it took, no matter how hard it got. Those girls had been brave enough to ask a stranger for help. The least he could do was be brave enough to answer. 5 months into the process, something happened that Corbin hadn't expected. The community rallied. Brenda Hollister, the diner owner who had tried to throw the girls out that first night, wrote a letter to the court. In it, she described what she'd witnessed, the way Corbin had stood up for 2 hungry children without hesitation, the way he'd protected them, the way he'd shown up week after week, refusing to abandon them. "That man has more heart than anyone I've ever met," Brenda wrote. "Those girls deserve a father like him." Kelly, the server, wrote a letter too. So did Corbin's boss at the carpentry shop. So did his neighbors, his late wife's best friend, the principal at Rory's school. One by one, people who had witnessed Corbin's journey stepped forward to vouch for him. Even Ruth Ramos, the social worker who had first responded that night at the diner, wrote a letter advocating for the adoption. "I have worked in child services for 17 years, and I have never seen someone fight this hard for children who weren't biologically their own. Juliet and Joy have already been through more loss than any child should endure. They deserve permanence. They deserve love, and I believe with everything in me that Corbin Dean can give them both." The final hearing was scheduled for April 14th, 2020, almost exactly 1 year after calling Bellamy had died. Corbin sat in the courtroom with Rory on one side and Juliet on the other. Joy sat on his lap, her small body pressed against his chest, her thumb in her mouth. She still hadn't spoken, not a single word in over a year, but she had started reaching for Corbin whenever she was scared. And right now, in this sterile, intimidating courtroom, she was clinging to him like a lifeline. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 60s named Judge Kathleen Morrison, reviewed the case one final time. She looked at the letters, the evaluations, the home study reports, the financial assessments. Then she looked at Corbin. "Mr. Dean," she said, her voice firm but not unkind, "the court has reviewed your petition for adoption. I want to be clear with you. This is highly unusual. You are a single father with a modest income. You already have 1 child. The system typically prefers to place children with 2-parent households or families with more financial stability." Corbin felt his heart sinking. "However," Judge Morrison continued, "I am also acutely aware that these 2 girls have been failed by the system. 3 placements in 8 months, multiple rejections, trauma upon trauma. And in all that time, there has been one constant: you." She paused, looking down at her papers. "I have read 17 letters of recommendation on your behalf. I have reviewed your financial situation and determined that, while not wealthy, you are stable and responsible. I have spoken with the girls' therapist, who reports that they have made more progress in the past 6 months since you entered their lives than in all the time before that. And I have observed in this very courtroom the way these children look at you."
Judge Morrison's expression softened, just slightly. "The way a child looks at their father." Corbin felt tears beginning to well up. "Therefore," Judge Morrison said, her voice strengthening, "it is the decision of this court that the petition for adoption is granted. As of this moment, Juliet and Joy Bellamy are legally and permanently the daughters of Corbin Dean." The courtroom erupted. Juliet burst into tears, loud, hiccuping sobs of joy and relief. Rory jumped up and down, pumping his fist in the air. Ruth Ramos wiped her eyes. Even the court stenographer was crying. And Joy, silent, broken Joy who hadn't spoken a word in over a year, lifted her head from Corbin's chest. She looked up at him with those pale eyes, now bright with tears, and she spoke. "Thank you, Daddy."
The courtroom went silent. Every single person froze, staring at the little girl who had just shattered a year of silence with two simple words. Corbin felt his heart explode. He pulled all three of his children into his arms, Juliet sobbing against his shoulder, Rory laughing, Joy still whispering "Daddy" over and over like she was testing the word, making sure it was real. "I've got you," Corbin whispered, his voice breaking. "I've got all of you, forever." Judge Morrison smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from her, and brought down her gavel. "This court is adjourned."
The drive home was a blur of tears and laughter and disbelief. 4 people in the car now instead of 2. 4 hearts beating together instead of one alone and one trying desperately to heal. When they pulled up to the small house on Maple Ridge Lane, Juliet gasped, "This is where we live now?" "This is home," Corbin said. He'd spent the past week preparing. The spare bedroom that had once been Joanna's craft room now held 2 small beds with matching yellow comforters, Juliet and Joy's favorite color. There were stuffed animals on the pillows, books on the shelves, a nightlight shaped like a star. The girls walked through the house slowly, taking everything in. When they reached their bedroom, Juliet started crying all over again. "It's ours?" she whispered. "It's yours," Corbin confirmed. Joy walked over to one of the beds and sat down carefully, as if afraid it might disappear. She picked up the stuffed bunny that Corbin had placed on the pillow and held it close. "Do you like it?" Rory asked, bouncing into the room. Joy looked at him and nodded. Then, so quietly that Corbin almost didn't hear it, she whispered, "Yes." Rory's eyes went wide. "He talked! Did you hear? She talked!" Juliet started laughing through her tears. "She talked! Joy, you talked!" Joy looked terrified for a moment, like she'd done something wrong. But then Corbin crouched down in front of her and took her small hands in his. "That was beautiful," he said gently. "Your voice is beautiful, and you can use it whenever you want, or you can be quiet whenever you want, whatever feels right to you. Okay?" Joy stared at him for a long moment. Then she threw her arms around his neck and whispered directly into his ear, "Okay, Daddy."
That night, Corbin made dinner for 4, grilled cheese sandwiches, the same kind they'd eaten that first night at the diner. The girls sat at the kitchen table with Rory, the 3 of them talking and laughing like they'd known each other forever. After dinner, Corbin did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He read a bedtime story to 3 children instead of 1. They all piled into the girls' room, Juliet and Joy in their beds, Rory sitting cross-legged on the floor, Corbin in a chair between them. He read The Velveteen Rabbit, Joanna's favorite story, about a toy who becomes real through being loved. When he finished, Juliet looked at him with sleepy eyes. "Will you be here in the morning?" she asked, her voice small and frightened. "Every morning," Corbin promised. "I'm not going anywhere. Ever." "Even if we're bad?" "Even then. You're my daughters now. Nothing is going to change that." Juliet smiled and snuggled deeper into her blankets. "Good night, Daddy." "Good night, sweetheart." Joy looked at him from her bed, her thumb in her mouth, Mr. Trunk clutched under one arm. She pulled her thumb out long enough to whisper, "Good night, Daddy." "Good night, Joy." Rory jumped up and hugged both his sisters. "Good night! I'm glad you're my sisters now." Corbin tucked them all in, turning on the star-shaped nightlight and leaving the door cracked open just a few inches, the way Juliet had requested, because she was still scared of the dark. He stood in the hallway for a long moment, listening to the quiet sounds of his children settling into sleep. 3 children. His 3 children. He thought his heart was full when Rory was born. He thought it was complete even after Joanna died. He thought he'd reached his capacity for love. But standing there in the hallway of his small house, listening to the breathing of 3 beautiful souls who had needed him just as much as he'd needed them, Corbin understood something profound. A heart doesn't have a fixed capacity. It doesn't run out. It doesn't reach a limit. It expands. It grows. It makes room for more than you ever thought possible. 3 weeks later, Corbin took all 3 children to the Riverside Family Diner.
They sat at the same window table where it had all begun. Juliet and Joy ordered grilled cheese sandwiches. Rory got his French fries, and when Brenda Hollister came to take their order, she looked at the four of them, this new, beautiful family, and smiled. "On the house," she said gruffly, wiping her eyes, "the whole meal. Consider it a congratulations gift." "Brenda, you don't have to—" "I know I don't have to," she interrupted. "I want to. You did a good thing, Corbin. A really good thing." After they ate, after Rory and the girls were playing tic-tac-toe on napkins and giggling over hot chocolate, Corbin sat back and watched them. He thought about that October evening, about Juliet's trembling voice asking if they could eat with him, about Joy's silence, about the fear in their eyes and the courage it must have taken to ask a stranger for help. He thought about all the times he could have said no, all the excuses he could have made, all the reasons it would have been easier to walk away.
But he hadn't walked away. And now, sitting in that diner with his 3 children, Corbin understood that this moment right here was what life was really about. Not the house you owned, or the job you worked, or the things you accumulated, but the people you chose to love, the hearts you opened your life to, the courage to say yes when someone asked for help. "Dad," Rory said, pulling him from his thoughts, "Juliet wants to know if we can come here every Wednesday like we used to." Corbin looked at Juliet's hopeful face, then at Joy, who was watching him quietly. "Every Wednesday," he promised. "Our table, our tradition, all 4 of us." Juliet beamed. Joy smiled. Rory cheered. And Corbin felt, for the first time in 3 years, completely whole. The next Sunday, Corbin did something he'd been planning for weeks. He took all 3 children to visit Joanna's grave. It was a beautiful April morning, the kind where the sun filters through new leaves and everything smells like rain and growing things. They brought wildflowers, Joanna's favorite. Corbin knelt down and placed the flowers against the headstone. Rory stood beside him, his small hand resting on his father's shoulder. Juliet and Joy hung back slightly, uncertain. "Joanna," Corbin said, softly, speaking to the stone as if his wife could hear him, "I want you to meet our daughters." He gestured for the girls to come closer. Slowly, tentatively, they approached. "This is Juliet. She's brave and kind and loves purple skies. And this is Joy. She's quiet and thoughtful and has the most beautiful voice you've ever heard." The girls stared at the headstone, reading the name carved into the granite. Joanna Marie Dean, beloved wife and mother, 1986-2016. "Is this your first mommy?" Juliet asked Rory. Rory nodded. "She was the best. She would have really liked you guys." Joy reached out and gently touched the headstone. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke. "Hi, Mama Joanna. We miss you even though we never met you, but we love Daddy and Rory, and we're a family now. Thank you for making Daddy into someone who helps people." Corbin felt tears streaming down his face. He pulled Joy close, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "She can hear you. I know she can. And I know she's so proud of you." They stood there for a long time, 4 people who had found each other against impossible odds, connected by loss and love and the courage to keep trying. Finally, Rory tugged on Corbin's sleeve. "Can we go home now, Dad? I want to teach Juliet and Joy how to play the game Mommy taught me." "What game?" "The one where you go around the table and everyone says one thing they're grateful for. Remember? Mommy said it was important to remember the good stuff even when things are hard." Corbin smiled through his tears. "Yeah, buddy. I remember. Let's go home." That evening, as the sun set over their small house on Maple Ridge Lane, the 4 of them sat around the kitchen table. Biscuit the cat had even emerged from hiding to investigate these new humans.
eventually settling in Juliet's lap and purring. "Okay," Rory announced. "I'll go first. I'm grateful for my new sisters and that Dad fought so hard to bring them home." Juliet went next. "I'm grateful for Mr. Corbin, for Daddy, for not walking away when he could have, for not giving up on us." Joy looked down at her hands, then up at Corbin. When she spoke, her voice was still soft, but it was growing stronger every day. "I'm grateful that we're not hungry anymore, and that we don't have to be scared, and that someone finally wanted to keep us." Corbin felt his throat tighten. He reached across the table and took each of their hands. "I'm grateful," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for two brave little girls who had the courage to ask a stranger if they could eat with him. Because that question, those 5 words, changed all of our lives forever. And I wouldn't trade this, any of this, for anything in the world." They sat there, hands joined, a family, forged not by blood, but by choice, by courage, by love that expanded to fill every empty space. Outside, the last light of day painted the sky in shades of purple and gold. And inside, 4 hearts beat together, no longer broken, no longer alone, but whole. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that one person really can make a difference, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that subscribe button, because every week we share stories that prove kindness changes everything. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, someone who's fighting their own battle, someone who's wondering if they can make a difference, send this to them. Because sometimes all it takes is 5 words to change everything. Can we eat with you? The answer should always be yes.